that's the line of descent from early days of Robert Marston, Marston, and that became Thomas Marsden, and there's Samuel Marsden there. There's all.
What do you mean became Thomas Marsden?
It was. If you look in, we looked in the church, the records, and that's you couldn't recognise the it was all handwritten, and we couldn't recognise it any more than that. So it looked like Marston.
Yeah.
So the name's probably changed by usage, but it became Marsden after that, and out near Parramatta, and he was expected to produce food on it, and he when he died in 18, he gradually acquired land, and when the Blue Mountains were crossed, he was the first in there to get enormous blocks of land, and he got vast properties out in the west, thousands of acres up there, and raised, two of his daughters settled out there and raised families out in that area, and so much so that a reverend, a lot of them went into the church, of course, and so much so that in later years one of them was the Bishop of Bathurst. He, when he died in 1838, he was the wealthiest man in the southern hemisphere, in the southern half of Australia.
Lots of money in religion.
Well, but how did he make his money? Not only with property, but when he came out here, he was sponsored by the Royal Missionary Society of London, and they asked him when he got out here to become the agent for them, the Royal Missionary Society, in the Pacific area. Now, in those days, the missionaries were, every time there was a new colony anywhere, in an island, anywhere at all, they sent missionaries out. And the missionary became the leading figure, and he usually controlled the island, like Fiji and Tonga. And the missionary controlled the island, and they were all, after a few years, they were all trading, and in copper, and a lot of it was copper and stuff like that, and as a result, Marsden was getting a commission for doing nothing, and he teamed up with a fella who came from India, named Campbell, who represented banking interests in England, and he came to Australia to see if he could set up money-making enterprises. And of course, he was a Christian man. He liked his church, and of course he was introduced to Marsden, and they become bosom buddies. And he introduced wharfing to Sydney Harbour, and Campbell's Wharves are where the Opera House is, and where the big building is just beside the Opera House, and they were there until the Opera House, and so Campbell introduced wharfage, and you can imagine the money, and Marsden went into it with him as a missionary. Through the Missionary Society, to make money for the Missionary Society. But Marsden got a commission, and he and Campbell got commissions on everything that came in and out of Sydney Harbour forever.
It all worked out.
You can imagine how much money was pouring in, because it became a trading section, and we were doing in seals and oil, which was important, whale oil and seals. Seal skins, and were very big business, and everything that went in and out of Sydney went through Campbell's Wharves, and Marsden and Campbell made them in. So, but the interesting thing about Marsden was when he died, in England it was common practice for property to go from a man died, it went to his nearest male relative. Did you ever read Pride and Prejudice?
Yes.
Well, Mr. Bennet had 5 daughters, didn't he? Or
Yes,
6
right,
daughters.
yeah.
And when he died, he couldn't leave it to his wife, his properties to his wife or his children. He had to leave them to a nephew, Mr. Collins.
That's right, yes.
And so,
Right.
and he tried to marry Lizzie,
Yeah.
but Mrs. Bennett was keen, so the property would stay in the family. But in Australia, women could inherit, and
So much more advanced here.
well, but it was a different country because it meant women. A lot of women became wealthy, and you had people like Mary Reeby.
I always like the you call that property title a tail male.
Yeah.
That's what you call it. I always thought that was a fascinating thing.
So much so that ships were coming out from England loaded with women, and they were recruiting women and young girls in England and bringing them out by the boatload
To be wives in Australia.
to be wives because there were no men here, and so much, and they were so important that
We are important.
that when a ship appeared off the heads, it used to take from when it was first sighted to when it docked. It could take a week. It seems crazy, but it could take a week. And men came from all over the country and got boats of all descriptions and rowed out to the ship to meet it to see if there were any women on board.
Right.
And some of the ships were met by people, and all these women were offloaded, and they were only given accommodation for a week. And the men used to pour into where they were accommodated to get them to marry them. So as
Sight unseen.
well, they wanted a woman, and the girls were, most of the girls were had been farm girls, and they were used to hard labour, and so they were highly sought after. And a couple of the ships had old women on them. They were one ship that I'll mention had one old lady on it. She was 26
Old.
and unmarried. That was old.
Yeah.
And she, of course, some of the girls that were coming were only 12 and 13,
That's disgusting.
and she advised all the girls that when they got here, they would be expected to marry, and she said, don't look at the young, handsome, strapping ones. Look for a bloke. Look at his teeth, and if he's got no teeth and he's old, marry him.
Lots of
Because
money.
the word had got back to England that women inherited. Do you follow?
Oh, right.
And they gave, a lot of these young girls came out and she said, you see that one? Don't marry him, marry him. And a lot of them married old men
so they inherit them.
gave them a good life for a couple of months and they died happy. And a lot of them went off to the country, you see, and they, when they died, the women inherited. And one girl that went to Tasmania, she was 14, and she went down there, and she produced 22 children.
What's the name? What's her name?
I've got the details downstairs there, but and they finished up ministers of religion, doctors, lawyers, and they owned
The
half
lot.
Tasmania.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, and she died healthy and at about 90.
But she
with
wasn't
all
that
these
healthy
children.
after 20.
And I think she had something like 200 or 300 grandchildren.
Bravo. Bravo. Bravo.
You would, wouldn't you?
Yeah, but a lot of people don't know about that part of Australia's history. But that was
Not at all, no.
And that's where Carolyn Chisholm came in. She used to be the lady that was on the $5 bill. No longer on it, unfortunately. But she came from India with her husband. He was a member of the East India Company in the army there. And she came here for a holiday and found that girls were arriving on the wharf and being mistreated. So she lived here and stayed here and met every ship that came in. when it came to the war, and she got the government to provide her with quarters, and she built a refuge for 120 girls, and she could have them in there, and she looked after them and while they were here, and men could visit, supervise visits, and she advised them on who to marry and who not to marry, and she helped them. She became known as the immigrant's friend. Yeah.